Welcome! In this video, we're going to be talking about giants in the Bible and all the different species of giants we have in the Bible. We have Amorites, Anakites, Zamuzites, Avites, Emites, Horites, all of whom seem to be descended from the original giants, the Nephilim. Now, according to the Bible, these different species of giants used to live in Israel and the surrounding countries, but they were all killed. So the question is, who killed all the giants? And Deuteronomy chapter 2 answers this for us, telling us it was Israel and its neighbors who killed all the giants. So when the Edomites entered the land, they killed the Horites. When the Moabites entered the land, they killed the Emites. When the Ammonites entered the land, they killed the Zamuzites. When the Philistines entered the land, they killed the Avites. And then finally, Israel, who was the last to enter the land, killed the Anakites. This is the Bible's explanation as to where all the giants went. Okay, let's dig a bit deeper into Deuteronomy chapter 2. In this chapter, Moses is leading the people from Egypt to the promised land. And you'd think that if you're going from Egypt to Israel, you'd go through the Philistine land, so modern-day Gaza, because that's the quickest route. But in Exodus 13, we read the following, quote, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was nearer, for God thought, if the people face war, they may change their minds and return to Egypt, end quote. So Moses doesn't take the people through Philistia. Instead, he takes them around and up through the countries of Edom, Moab, Ammon, and then enters the land. So this means that the Israelites must travel through the lands of other people. So Moses makes it very clear to the Israelites, as we pass through these other countries, you can't take their land because they earned it by killing their giants. So to summarize Deuteronomy 2, the Moabites, the Edomites, the Ammonites all earned their land by defeating their giants. Therefore, Israel must not take any of their land as they pass through it. Rather, Israel must defeat their own giants in order to earn their own land. Okay, let's now begin to read Deuteronomy 2 for ourselves, and we'll begin with the first land that the Israelites passed through, Edom. So Moses tells the people before they pass through Edom the following in verse 4. You're about to pass through the territory of your relatives, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir. They will be afraid of you, but be very careful. Do not provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land, not even enough to put your foot on. I've given Esau the hill country of Seir as his own. Later on in verse 22, we're told why, quote, the Lord has done the same for the descendants of Esau who live in Seir, when he destroyed the Horites from before them. They drove them out and have lived in their place to this day, end quote. So the reason why Israel can't take any of the land of Edom is because the Edomites earned it by killing the original inhabitants of the land. Also, please note that the Horites are not explicitly described as giants, so they may not be giants at all. But many assume they are because the other species in this passage are called giants. Okay, let's now put the Edomites to the side. Israel is now going to pass through the land of Moab, and Moses is going to give them a similar warning. In verse 9, we read the following. The Lord warned us, do not bother the Moabites, the descendants of Lot, or start a war with them. I've given them Ar as their property, and I will not give you any of their land. A race of giants called the Emites had once lived in the area of Ar. They were strong and numerous and as tall as the Anakites, another race of giants. Both the Emites and the Anakites are also known as the Raphites, though the Moabites called them Emites. End quote. Okay, a bit of confusing terminology there. It seems that each country had a different name for giants. Finally, Israel is going to pass through the land of Ammon, and we're going to see a similar warning again in verse 19, quote, when you come to the Ammonites, do not harass them or provoke them to war, for I will not give you possession of any land belonging to the Ammonites. I've given it as a possession to the descendants of Lot. That too was considered a land of the Raphites, who used to live there, but the Ammonites called them Zamuzites. We continue to read in verse 21. There were people strong and numerous and as tall as the Anakites. The Lord destroyed them before the Ammonites, who drove them out and settled in their place, end quote. Okay. Now, even though Israel doesn't pass through Philistia, remember they went around the land of the Philistines, Deuteronomy 2 still tells us about the giants there as well. In verse 23, we read the following. And as for the Avites who live in the villages as far as Gaza, the Caphtorites, coming from Caphtor, destroyed them and settled in their place, end quote. Please note again, like the Horites, the Avites are not explicitly described as giants, so they may not be giants. We are again just assuming this based on the context. We're also told something very interesting here about the Philistines, that they come from Caphtor, which refers to the Greek islands. So Caphtor would be about here. So we're being told that the Philistines migrated from Greece to modern-day Gaza. And we can actually historically prove that the Philistines did in fact make this migration from this part of the world. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel because that's what our next video is going to be all about. And while you're down there, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. It makes a huge difference to the channel. Okay, so to summarize so far, Israel has now passed through Edom, Moab, Ammon, but then they get stuck in the land of Heshbon and Bashan. This is Amorite land, and the Amorites are giants. So Moses goes to speak to these kings to ask for passage through their land. He first goes to speak to the king of Heshbon, a man by the name of King Shion. And Moses says the following to him: "Only allow me to pass through on foot, just as the descendants of Esau who live in Seir have done for me, and likewise the Moabites who live in Ar, until I cross the Jordan into the land that the Lord our God is giving us." But King Shion of Heshbon was not willing to let us pass through, for the Lord your God had hardened his spirit and made his heart defiant in order to hand him over to you, as he has now done. The Lord said to me, "See, I've begun to give Shion and his land over to you. Begin now to take possession of his land." End quote. So because King Shion won't let Israel through, the Israelites kill him and take his land. Moses then goes to speak to the next Amorite king, the king of Bashan, who has the best name in the Bible, King Og. And he likewise won't let Israel pass through his land. In Deuteronomy chapter 3, we read about him, and he is explicitly described as a giant. In verse 11, we read, "King Og of Bashan was the last survivor of the giant Raphites." We continue to read in verse 11, "His bed was made of iron and was more than 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. It can still be seen in the Ammonite city of Rabbah." End quote. Now, I find this absolutely fascinating. Put yourself in the position of the original reader, and you're a bit skeptical about all of these giants who used to live in the land. So here the author is saying to you, if you want to double check whether this is true or not, go to Ammon, go to this specific town, and you'll find the huge bed of King Og, which proves that giants were in the land. Okay, so since King Og doesn't allow them to pass through his land, the Israelites kill him as well and take his land. In verse 8, we read, "So at that time we took from the 2 kings of the Amorites the land beyond the Jordan." Interesting fact here, this land that they conquered is the only land that Israel controlled that was on the east side of the Jordan River. Okay, it's time now for another summary. So Moses has led the people through Edom, Moab, Ammon, and defeated the Amorite kings. He's finally ready to cross the Jordan and enter the promised land. But not so fast. Moses is not allowed to cross the Jordan River and enter Israel. Why? Go read Numbers 20. It has to do with Moses disobeying God, but that's a story for another day. So, because Moses isn't allowed to cross the Jordan River, he's on the east side of the Jordan, and he gives the Israelites a pep talk before they cross the river themselves and begin to take the land. In chapter 9 of Deuteronomy, Moses says, "Hear, O Israel, you're about to cross the Jordan today to go in and dispossess nations larger and mightier than you, great cities fortified to the heavens. A strong and tall people, the offspring of the Anakim, whom you know, you have heard it said, who can stand up to the Anakim?" End quote. So here we're told that some of the people who live in the promised land are the offspring of giants, the Anakim. Elsewhere in the Bible, we're also told that the Amorites, another race of giants, were also in the land. In Amos chapter 2, God is speaking and says the following in verse 9, "But as my people watched, I destroyed the Amorites. Though they were as tall as cedars and as strong as oaks, I destroyed the fruit of their branches and dug out their roots. It was I who rescued you from Egypt and led you through the desert for 40 years, so you could possess the land of the Amorites." End quote. Okay, that finishes our giant adventure through the Bible. If you've learned something new today, please consider hitting that like button, leaving me a comment, and subscribing for more exciting videos. If you really want to support my work and get tons of bonus content as well, please consider becoming a patron. For the patron exclusive part of this video, we're going to talk about an alleged contradiction about how the Israelites entered the land. In this video, we only spoke about the Deuteronomy passages, which tells us that the Israelites went through Edom, Moab, and Ammon. But in the book of Numbers, we're actually told something very different, that they didn't enter via this route, but rather they went around all of these countries. So we're going to investigate this contradiction in the patron exclusive section. Additionally, for my patrons, we're going to be discussing something that I find really fascinating, which is this land right here, Bashan and Heshbon, that Israel conquers. This land, which is to the east of the Jordan River, and that makes it very unique. The inhabitants of this land will end up building an altar to Yahweh, and this altar will cause a near civil war in Israel, a really fascinating story in the Bible that very few people know about. So we'll be reading that story as well. So if you want this Patron exclusive content, and most importantly, you believe in the goal of this channel, which is to create a library of videos that objectively and respectfully analyze the Bible, please consider becoming a patron today. If not, no stress, just hit that like button and leave me a comment, and stay tuned for our next video on the Philistines. Thanks for watching until the end, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Okay, my beautiful patrons, let's now talk about this contradiction. But before we begin, if you're new to being a patron to this channel, make sure you check out my old videos and check out all that exclusive patron-only content and an entire series on Daniel 11 that's only accessible to my patrons. There is so much stuff you get. And again, before we begin, can I just thank you guys for being patrons? There wouldn't be any videos at all if it wasn't for your support, so thank you so much. All right, let's now talk about this really fascinating thing about this contradiction. So in Deuteronomy 2, we're very clearly told that Moses and the Israelites went through Edom, Moab, Ammon, and then entered the land of Israel. And this is most clearly told to us when Moses has his encounter with the king of Heshbon, King Sihon. And Moses says to him, quote, "Only allow me to pass through on foot, just as the descendants of Esau who live in Seir have done for me, and likewise the Moabites who live in Ar, until I cross the Jordan into the land that the Lord our God is giving us." So here we get two green ticks for passage through Edom and Moab. This is what Deuteronomy 2 very clearly states for us. But this isn't the only part of the Bible where we're told about Israel's wilderness wanderings. We're also told about them in Numbers 20. And in Numbers 20, it appears that Moses isn't allowed to enter the land of Edom, so he instead has to go around all of this land right here. So let's now read when Moses goes to talk to the king of Edom. In verse 14, we read, "Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the adversity that has befallen us, how our ancestors went down to Egypt, and we have lived in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians oppressed us and our ancestors. And when we cried to the Lord, he heard our voice and sent an angel and brought us out of Egypt. And here we are in Kadesh, a town on the edge of your territory. Now let us pass through your land. We will not pass through the field or the vineyard or drink water from any well. We will go along the king's highway, not turning aside to the right hand or to the left until we have passed through your territory." But Edom said to him, "You shall not pass through, or we will come out with a sword against you." So here we're very clearly told that the Edomites do not let Israel through their land. We continue to read in verse 19, just to really hammer this home. The Israelites said to him, "We will stay on the highway, and if we drink of your water, we and our livestock, then we will pay for it. It is only a small matter, just let us pass through on foot." But he said, "You shall not pass through." And Edom came out against them with a large force, heavily armed. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through their territory, so Israel turned away from them. So here we're told that they have to go around Edom to enter the land, which contradicts what we read in Deuteronomy 2. And later on in Numbers 21, we're told more about this. It says, "From Mount Hor they set out by the way to the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom. But the people became discouraged on the way." So when the people come discouraged, I encourage you to go read Numbers 21. Since they have to go around Edom, the people of Israel get annoyed, and this is where we get the story of the serpents and Moses having to put a serpent up on a stick for people to look at. This is, of course, quoted by Jesus in none other than John 3. So this is where we get this story. It comes from the fact that Israel had to go around Edom. So this is tying it into the New Testament there. Okay, so Israel is not allowed to go through Edom according to Numbers 20. What about Moab? Well, let's now talk about Israel going through Moab. And my diagram here on the right is not that accurate because we're actually told in the book of Numbers that they were on the plains of Moab before they crossed through Israel. So they were actually in the land of Moab before they went through, but they were just kind of like on the plains of it. They weren't granted access. So Deuteronomy 2 tells us that the king of Moab, or the Moabites, allowed them to pass through their land. But when we read Numbers 21, if you know the story of Balaam, they were very annoyed when the Israelites were in the plains of Moab. We read in verse 1, "The Israelites set out and camped in the plains of Moab across the Jordan from Jericho. Now Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites." And there he's referring to King Og and King Sihon. We continue to read in verse 3, "Moab was in great dread of the people because they were so numerous. Moab was overcome with fear of the Israelites." So as you can see, these people are worried that the Israelites are coming into their land. And this is where we have Balaam prophesying a curse against Israel. But if you've read the story, he is unable to curse them and actually blesses them. So this tells us once again that it appears that Moab was not pleased with Israel passing through the land. But granted, they did rest on the plain. So there is a bit of nuance there. So do we have a contradiction on our hands? It appears that we potentially do. I couldn't find many scholars writing about this or any authors at all. So I encourage you, if you find anything on this, please let me know. In all of my searching, I really couldn't find anyone addressing this contradiction, which makes me either think I'm missing something or that no one is clearly writing about it. I'm not sure. Also, I've given you a very simplistic route. This is what the route would more likely look like. But if you compare different maps, each map looks a little bit different. So there clearly was different routes that the Bible talks about, and there is potentially a contradiction here. But I don't want to say anything too definitive. I want you to do your own research. Okay, we're now going to talk about a story that, for whatever reason, I find really fascinating. And it is when Moses conquers the Amorites, the king Bashan and king of Heshbon. So Moses will take this land. And what makes this land so unique is it is on the east side of the Jordan River. And when they conquered this land, the tribes of Gad and Reuben look at this land and they're like, you know what, this would be great for our sheep. Can we take this land, Moses? So these two tribes ask Moses for this land. And this is where we get this story about where it happened. So we read this in Numbers 32. It says, "Now the Reubenites and the Gadites owned a very great number of cattle. When they saw that the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead," so that's Bashan and Heshbon, "was a good place for cattle, the Gadites and the Reubenites came and spoke to Moses, to Eleazar the priest, and to the leaders of the congregation, saying, 'The land that the Lord subdued before the congregation of Israel is a land for cattle, and your servants have cattle.' They continued, 'If we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants for a possession. Do not make us cross the Jordan.'" So what it looks like here is that the tribes of Gad and Reuben are trying to get out of having to cross the Jordan and fight against everyone on the other side of the Jordan. It looks like they're trying to get out of that. And in response, Moses goes apoplectic. He gets really angry. But Moses said to the Gadites and to the Reubenites, "Shall your brothers go to war while you sit here? Why will you discourage the heart of the Israelites from going over into the land that the Lord has given them?" The Gadites and the Reubenites answered, saying, "As the Lord has spoken to your servants, so we will do. We will cross over armed before the Lord into the land of Canaan, but the possession of our inheritance shall remain with us on this side of the Jordan." So here the two tribes are saying, listen, we'll cross over, we'll help you fight, but then we want to come back to the east side of the Jordan so we can live in this land. And Moses really likes this plan. We continue to read, "Moses gave to them, to the Gadites, and to the Reubenites, and to half the tribe of Manasseh, son of Joseph, the kingdom of King Sihon of the Ammonites, and the kingdom of King Og of Bashan, the land and its towns, with the territories of the surrounding towns." So here we're told that Gad and Reuben, and also half the tribe of Manasseh, get this land on the east side of the Jordan. So as you can see there, we have Reuben and we have Gad, and we have half the tribe of Manasseh. So Manasseh, interestingly, half its possession is on the west side of the Jordan and the other side is on the east side. And if you look at maps of Israel, hopefully this now makes sense. I'm just going to use my cursor here for a moment. You can see Reuben, you can see Gad, you can see half the tribe of Manasseh. All of these are on the east side of the Jordan River. Here we have the Dead Sea, and here we have the Sea of Galilee. We have Judah in the south, and then we have the 10 tribes of Israel up the north. So this is hopefully giving you your bearings. You can also see Edom down here. You can see Moab. You can see Ammon. So as you can see, that's what we were talking about as we were talking through this video here. All right, let's now continue to read, because we haven't got to the civil war part yet. Because what's going to end up happening is that these tribes are going to want to build an altar. So the tribes of Gad and Reuben and half the tribe of Manasseh obviously want an altar on their side of the Jordan River. And this is going to cause a lot of grief and will cause a near civil war. Writing on this passage in the Yale Anchor Commentary, we read, "Here is a story that originated in some obscure altar building program, which very nearly developed into all-out civil war, pitting brothers against brothers," end quote. Okay, so let's read this passage for ourselves. It's in Joshua 22, and I just find this really fascinating, and we'll be talking through the implications of it as well. So in Joshua 22, we read the following in verse 10. "The Reubenites and the Gadites and half the tribe of Manasseh built an altar by the Jordan, an altar of great size. The Israelites heard that the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh had built an altar opposite the land of Canaan in the region near the Jordan across from the Israelites. And when the people of Israel heard it, the whole assembly of the Israelites gathered at Shiloh to make war against them." So as you can see here, they all gather at Shiloh. Shiloh seems to be the original place of worship for Israel. It's the place where they take the Ark of the Covenant and set up the tabernacle. So this is where they gather, and they hear about this rival place of worship on the other side of the Jordan. So they go over and they're ready to make war. "They came to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead, and they said to them, What is this treachery that you've committed against the God of Israel in turning away from following the Lord by building yourselves an altar today in rebellion against the Lord? Have we not had enough of the sin at Peor, from which even yet we have not cleansed ourselves, and for which a plague came upon the congregation of the Lord, that you must turn away today from following the Lord? If you rebel against the Lord today, he will be angry with the whole congregation of Israel tomorrow. But now, if your land is unclean, cross over into the Lord's land, where the Lord's tabernacle now stands, and take for yourself a possession among us. Only do not rebel against the Lord or rebel against us by building yourselves an altar other than the altar of the Lord our God. Now, in response to this plea, the Gadites and the Reubenites say the following, and I'm going to be quoting from the NLT here, just because it's a little clearer. Before I was quoting from the New Revised Standard Version, and I just found it a bit wordy. This is very clear. So we're going to read in verse 21. Then the people of Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh answered the heads of the clans of Israel, "The Lord, the Mighty One, is God. The Lord, the Mighty One, is God. He knows the truth, and may Israel know it too. We have not built the altar in treacherous rebellion against the Lord. If we have done so, do not spare our lives this day. If we have built an altar for ourselves to turn away from the Lord, or to offer burnt offerings or grain offerings or peace offerings, may the Lord himself punish us. The truth is, we have built this altar because we fear that in the future, your descendants will say to ours, 'What right do you have to worship the Lord, the God of Israel? The Lord has placed the Jordan River as a barrier between our people and you people of Reuben and Gad. You have no claim to the Lord's. So your descendants may prevent our descendants from worshiping the Lord.' So we decided to build the altar not for burnt offering or sacrifices, but as a memorial. It will remind our descendants and your descendants that we too have the right to worship the Lord at his sanctuary with our burnt offerings, sacrifices, and peace offerings. Then your descendants will not be able to say to ours, 'You have no claim to the Lord.' If they say this, our descendants can reply, 'Look at this copy of the Lord's altar that our ancestors made. It is not for burnt offering or sacrifices. It is a reminder of the relationship both of us have with the Lord. Far be it from us to rebel against the Lord or turn away from him by building your own altar for burnt offering, grain offerings, or sacrifices. Only the altar of the Lord our God that stands in front of the tabernacle may be used for that purpose." The people of Reuben and Gad named the altar Witness, for they said, "It is a witness between us and them that the Lord is our God too." Okay, so this altar is called Witness. And can we just put on our skeptical glasses for a moment and think about why this story would come into existence? So again, I'm purely speculating here. Don't take this with a huge grain of salt. Is it possible that there are these people on the east side of the Jordan who also had an altar for worship? And these people also worshipped Yahweh. But then, as time went on, there became a belief that you can only worship in one place. And therefore, they had to explain why it is that these people had another altar. We also need to explain why it is that these people on the other side of the Jordan also worship the same God as us. It seems that this story functions in an etymological way. It is trying to explain why the people on the other side of the Jordan also worship as we do, and trying to explain why they have altars. And it's kind of like retrospectively saying, they didn't actually use these altars for sacrifice or anything like that, because that, of course, would violate this idea that you can only sacrifice in one spot. But instead, they're saying, they only use it as a witness. I think that's a good understanding of this passage, but again, very skeptical. It's really me putting on my skeptical glasses. I could be dead wrong. Okay, patrons, we are going to end it there. I really hope that you've enjoyed these stories about both the contradiction and the near civil war. Hopefully you've learned something new, and I thank you again for being patrons. Patrons, keep the lights on. This channel would have died a long time ago if it wasn't for my patrons. So thank you so much. Please check out the other patron exclusive content that you have. There's behind the scenes content. There's so much for you guys. Please stay patrons for a long, long time, and I'll see you soon in the next one. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.